Welcome to the Flash Finds podcast, the world's fastest podcast where we explore how Facebook can help you with the stuff you're into. I'm your host, Emma Rogue, and today I'm with creator and home decor guru, Julie Souza. Julie, what's your number one tip?
So if you're into home decor, I would suggest looking into Buy Nothing Facebook groups. It's a great way to explore your style, all for free.
Ooh, we love free stuff. Thanks, Julie. See you next time on the Flash Finds podcast, all about discovering the stuff on Facebook you care about. Bye.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Hannah Otto. Hannah recently became the fastest known woman to ride the 137-mile-long Kokopelli's Trail from Moab, Utah to Loma, Colorado, besting the previous fastest known time by over an hour. In addition to racing gravel and mountain bikes, she's also a certified athletic trainer. Thanks for joining me, Hannah.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on the finish. Must be exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been, like we'll talk about, it's been more than a year in the making. So that makes it extra rewarding for sure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So your record-breaking ride actually happened back in May. And so, yeah, now it's July and you can finally talk about it. How does that feel? Was that were you nervous kind of leading up to this or excited to tell people? What were you feeling?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. The last couple days, the film came out just a couple days ago. We're recording this right away. Mm-hmm. I feel like the last couple days, it's been the first time regarding this project I've actually exhaled, because we have gone through so much with it, everything from pre-riding to, okay, now I'm going to do the first attempt. What does the first attempt look like? Oh my gosh, I don't know what this is going to look like. Can I even do it? Then you do the first attempt and spoiler alert, I failed. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I failed. Now I have to deal with this whole emotional aspect of it. And then you're going back and as an athlete, I experience nerves a lot. I get very, very nervous before races. That is a standard emotion for me. But standing on that start line for the second time after what I experienced the first time, I didn't just experience nerves. I experienced fear. And fear is not a common emotion for me. So then going through that, experiencing that fear, then getting the success of it, finally having that reward, and all the while through all of these emotions, through the disappointment, the fear, the excitement, keeping it to myself has been so hard. Right. So I'm so excited to finally share with the world, everything we've been through in the last year.
Yeah. Well, right. Yeah. I was thinking, wow, you must be really excited. I did it, but I can't tell anybody yet. But then the other thing I thought of was oh shoot, what if somebody else makes an attempt between May and July and somehow they beat your time? Were you worried about that at all?
It's always possible, for sure. I mean, you definitely keep an eye on that segment, keep an eye on people you think might be going down there. So you never know. But of course you want the moment where the film can come out and you do have the record. But that's also a piece of this, right? Is records are set to be broken. I don't own the record. I'm just borrowing it for whatever amount of time that is. And then someone else will borrow it for their amount of time. So I'm just thankful to have had my moment in time on the trail. And for however long that lasts, I'm grateful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I mean, did that go into your planning at all, though? Because it sounds like, the first time you did it, made the attempt was October. And then I imagine if you're riding in October, I mean, as we'll talk about, that's kind of the last chance before winter hits and it gets cold. And so you figure, well, nobody's going to do it, November, December. And then I guess after May, right now, it's probably way too hot for people to be going out. So was that part of it, or was it just, October and May are good time of year to do it, and that's why you picked those dates?
So that's a really interesting question. The October date came around because I'm a racer. I have a full race schedule, and this was going to be my longest effort to date. And so there was a lot of unknown regarding that for me, of how to recover, how I would handle it. And so I wanted to do it when my race season was over, when I could do this effort.
Right.
And then however long it took me to pick myself up off the ground and recover from that, I had that ability. And so for me, the end of the season was October. Perfect. You can do this in the fall. The previous female record was set in, I think she did it November 3rd or something like that. So again, in the fall. And so it just made sense. At least I thought it made sense. We came to find that you can't always force things to make sense. But that was then an issue, actually, when I didn't get it. It's like, well, when can I do this again? Because that is a tricky thing about the Kokopelli, is it's not available year round. Like you mentioned, there is snow in the winter, and in the summer it is so hot that it is definitely not manageable for a record setting pace. And so you basically do it in the fall or you do it in the spring. And I originally picked the fall because I wanted it at the end of my race season. The spring set it up in the beginning of my race season, which felt a little scary, to be honest. But after I tried that one in the fall, I wanted it so bad. I had to make space in my world to go back for the Kokopelli. And I think in the end, it worked out really beautifully because I did it 1 month before Unbound, and it felt like the perfect training for that.
Yeah, interesting. Well, so tell us a little more about that October attempt, and what happened. Like, why didn't that work out for you?
Yeah, the October attempt, it is for sure the hardest thing I have ever done. And it took me.
And you've done a lot of hard things. So that's
Thank you.
That's saying a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, it took me to where I thought my limits were and far beyond them. And for that, I will be forever grateful, because you don't know where your limits are until you're asked to hit them, because most of our brains will pull us back before we actually hit those true limits. And this took me to a place that I've never been before. And I survived. I came out the other side. And I feel like that has actually given me this superpower to realize, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much I actually had left most of the time. And now I feel like I have this new ability to push into that space, because I've been there and I've been further than that due to this attempt. So at this attempt, like I said, it was October. We originally were going to do October 30th, actually.
Okay.
And every morning leading into the attempt, I'm on my phone. I'm looking at my phone. I'm looking at the weather, and the weather just keeps dropping until I'm looking at it and I'm going, this doesn't make sense, because the weather, it was getting so cold. It was clear a huge storm was rolling in. And so we said, okay, we have to beat this storm. We're moving it up one day. Last minute, we moved it up one day to October 29th. We thought we were going to just barely sneak it in. And we woke up. It seemed good in Moab. We thought, okay, we've got it. It's 35 degrees in Moab. And then you start climbing. And you climb from 4,000 feet to 8,000 feet. And as I climbed up there, it was clear that the weather had already rolled in at higher elevations. And I was slapped with a 20 plus mile per hour wind that was absolutely frigid. The actual temperature at the top was 17 degrees. So you add in the wind chill and it was likely in the single digits. Because I was doing this self-supported, I didn't bring extra clothing because I didn't want to have to carry it all day. So I had arm warmers, leg warmers, and a wind jacket. And it was in single digits.
Wow.
My fingers froze to the point that I couldn't move them. I actually, at one point, had them stuck in a fist and had to stop with one hand and try and just wrench them open because they were stuck. So I definitely had some sort of frostbite or frostnip going on there. I was hypothermic. I was shivering like crazy, despite, usually your body's spending a lot of energy cooling itself down because you're working so hard. But despite working so hard, I was shivering uncontrollably. I was riding in some places 2 to 3 inches of snow. And my hydration, all of my fluids completely froze. I had no access to my fluids. And So this attempt, and this is all in the first 2 hours of a 13-hour day.
Yeah.
And so I'm immediately faced with the challenge of, what do I do? Do I quit? Do I keep going? Do I try anyways? And for me, the theme of this attempt was hope that it'll get better, hope that this too will pass. And, I think that hope drove me forward for the entire 13 hours. And it helped that for most of that time, I was ahead of the previous FKT. I had this
unbelievable.
I think at most I was ever 15 minutes up, but throughout the day that got smaller and smaller and smaller. And when I entered the final single track with 12 miles to go, I was dead set tied. So with 12 miles to go, I was tied with the previous FKT. And at that point,
oh my goodness,
I had been so dehydrated, so when you're shivering, you're burning more calories. I was so nutritionally depleted. I was still completely frozen. It never got above 40 degrees, even in the middle of the day at lower elevations. And I was delirious and I missed it. After all of that, all of those hours, I came across the line 15 minutes shy. And in the moment, you're so far gone, you're so depleted that all I could do was fall on the ground. But the next day you wake up and you lie in bed and you open your eyes and you say, did that really happen? Did I really do that whole thing only to miss it in the last 12 miles? And I recognize that there's a lot harder emotional things to go through, but man, those next 6 months trying to swallow that was so frustrating. And, even though no one knew at the time, I knew this was a public failure because this video was going out whether or not I got it again. There was no plan to redo this. And that was the day after the attempt. I went in for my post interview. We did the post with the crew. I stood up and I was like, hey, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry that I missed it. I tried my hardest. Sorry if this messes up with the plan. And they all looked at me and were just like, Hannah, this will be the best story. People can relate to failure. You're not the only person in the world who has ever failed. And that alone was such a wonderful reaction. And the next statement out of my mouth was, well, what if I came back? Would you hold the footage? Would you let me try again? And maybe just at the end of the film, you could put like a little sentence, Hannah came back 6 months later and tried again and got it. And their response was, oh no, we wouldn't do that. We'd come back with you. And so that was a really, really sweet thing with the crew, with competitive cyclists, the humanity in that and the friendships we developed were really special.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, it's funny. Do you think you would ever come around? Like, let's say it just didn't work out. You couldn't do another FKT. You think you would have eventually come around to like, man, I got within 15 minutes despite these like horrific conditions. I mean, did you ever I don't know, tell yourself it's okay? Or do you think you would always carry that and just be like, failed?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that the intellectual side of myself, of anybody, can sit down and recognize you were really close. You were so close despite all of that, And what's funny is now that I do have it, which makes it actually easier to take a deep breath, 1,000-foot view, look back. I'm more proud of the first attempt than the second one, which is really cool. And I think it's so funny because the whole thing, originally we were filming this record-breaking ride. And now to me, this film, the record is not the part that I want people to walk away from. I don't want, that's great. It's cool. But I don't need people to walk away from this film going, oh my gosh, she set the record. What I want people to walk away from is understanding that it's okay to fail. you just try again, because I think we've all been there. And, you know, for me, that failure, it gave me so much more than the success gave me. It changed my perspective of what hard is. Nothing feels as hard anymore because I did that first attempt. And that's what gave me the superpower in that second attempt. Was every time I was out there and something felt hard, it felt impossible, it felt like I can't do this, you know, whatever it might be. If that was my first time doing it, maybe I would have given in a little bit and not beat it by quite so much. But because I had done that first attempt and I knew what it was like to truly bring yourself to the limit, I could feel those things. I could feel this is so hard and say, but it's not the hardest. You've done something even harder. And it gave me this ability to, it made me stronger. It made me stronger than I've ever been, not just physically, but mentally. And I think anyone who has been through a major challenge will absolutely relate to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me of this idea of type 2 fun, right? Like for those of us who don't race, who ride just for fun, and we all have these rides that end up being really tough or painful, or, you know, the weather's bad. And in the moment we're like, this is awful. I hate this. I'm never riding my bike again. And then you get back and, you know, for me, it depends how bad it is, right? Sometimes it's the next day. Sometimes it's a month later that I look back, but I look back and I'm like, actually, you know, that was kind of fun. Like, is that the same thing, or is this like a different thing? Like racing, I mean, it's not supposed to be fun, or is it? Like, are you going to look back and be like, that was a great ride? Or are you always going to be like, no, that was hard. That sucked.
Oh, it was hard. I don't think I can, in good conscience, say like, oh, that first attempt riding in frigid conditions was fun, but I wouldn't change a single thing about it. Like, I'm so thankful for that. Like I said, because it offered me this new perspective. And so I think, again, even like you're saying, right? Like you come back, it wasn't fun. You didn't have fun. You're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want to ever do that again. Please, never again.
Yeah.
But you're stronger because of it. And I think that that's, you know, it makes you realize what you're capable of. And as people, I think it's such a valuable thing on and off the bike to realize that we are stronger than we think we are is really empowering.
Yeah, that's awesome. Awesome message. So I'm curious, did you make any adjustments to like your strategy or your equipment or anything for the second time around? Or was it just like, well, at least it won't be cold like this, it'll go fine because it won't be cold? Or yeah, what was your second attempt like?
Yeah, I had a couple equipment changes, a couple different strategy changes. I would say, you know, probably the biggest change was that I actually did take a little bit more. So, you know, one of the things I realized in that first attempt was a lot can go wrong out there, you know, and I was new, I was naive, and I realized how you cannot always anticipate everything. And for me, a huge difference in the second attempt was that realization. This will not be perfect. You know, I come from a racing background where we try and make things perfect, especially in XCO, you know, where it's like, we're talking about grams, we're talking about seconds. This 13 hours, 12 hours, it will not be perfect. Instead, what you have to find confidence is the fact that you can adapt to any imperfection. And so that was a lot of my mindset the second time, was not trying to make things perfect, but rather trying to focus on my ability to adapt and finding confidence in that. And so I had like a little bit bigger top two bag the second time. I took a little bit more. I took a Usui pack with a little extra pouch on the back that had more space so that I could bring a little bit more the second attempt. And largely what that more was actually nutrition. So from the first attempt to the second attempt was 6 months. And it does take some time to train your gut to take in huge amounts. Anyone who's ever eaten during exercise knows that it can be really hard to eat. And the first time I probably ate somewhere between 70 to 80 grams of carbs per hour,
Okay.
which is honestly like pretty solid. But if you extrapolate that across a 13-hour effort, the whole day is somewhere in the 8 to 9,000 calorie range. So you're still finishing in a huge deficit.
Whoa.
And so the second attempt, I practiced in those 6 months, bumping those numbers up, and was closer to 100 grams of carbs per hour in the second attempt.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the things I was curious about. Like, what did you eat? Like, just pure like energy bar kind of stuff and just pure carbs? Or did you have at least something a little more, hopefully a little more delicious than that?
Yeah, it's funny again, because you do have to carry everything. And, a lot of us racers, we are used to getting our calories in the liquid form. But when you're so limited in the amount of liquids that you get across this ride, you have to become a little more creative. So I only planned the opportunity to stop one time at Dewey Bridge, which is about halfway. And I carried a total of 2.5 liters. So my goal was, if I finished all of that by the time I got to Dewey, that means I would get to replace all of that, which meant that I would have 5 liters across the 13 hours. And it's funny because I talked to the dietitian that I work with before. I was like, is that insane? Does that make sense? And she was like, well, do you have an option? I was like, no. And she was like, then let's not even go into it. So, wow. That's pushing the limits for sure. The amount of fluid, at least for me in my body and my sweat rate, that I can tolerate for that amount of time.
Yeah.
So anyways, I couldn't just rely on high carb drink mixes. I did pack my first 2.5 liters really high with high carb drink mix. I'm sponsored by First Endurance, so I use their liquid shots, and I took 18 of those throughout. So if anyone has ever taken, those type of liquid shot, type of gel packets, that's almost an entire box of them. So that is a lot.
Wow.
I also had a couple of bars in addition to that, and those were my primary source of nutrition throughout the whole thing. And that came out to about 5,000 calories worth of nutrition, all in all. One other thing I did have that I think people think is funny is, across 12 or 13 hours, it's so easy to say 12 or 13 hours, 12 or 13 hours. But when you play that out, you wake up, you get ready, go to work, you have 3 meals, you come home, you watch TV. Like, that's a full day. It's a work day plus. So think about what you're doing across that. It is a long time. And while carbohydrate is what is fueling me throughout that, it's a long time to deprive your body of protein. And even though you maybe don't need the protein during that activity to fuel yourself forward, one of the things that protein does is it satiates. And so you might, even though you're fueling yourself, you might experience hunger without protein. And so at hour 4 and hour 8, I plan to take in about 10 grams of protein. And I did that with these little tiny meat sticks that I carried with me on the ride as well.
Yeah, nice. That makes sense too, because it's salty too. I mean, I guess your drink mix hopefully has like the right amount of salts in it. But
you're for sure getting the right sodium content through drink mix, but it still tastes sweet. You're not having that, whatever it would be, the taste sensation of the salty. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So what did your whole setup weigh? Like, I imagine it was still very lightweight, even though you're saying you brought more than the first attempt, but did you weigh your bike, like with all your gear on it?
That's a good question. I actually never did weigh my bike, but honestly, you're right. It wouldn't have been that much, because on the bike, I had a very small Lezyme light, and I had 2 small top 2 bags that one of them was full of, it had a battery pack and then food. And the other one had like a tube, a small thing of chain lube, and an SOS device. So not that many extra things on the bike.
Yeah. And this is like, I assume, which bike did you use? Is one of your race bikes?
Yeah, I used my Pivot Mach 4 SL, and I used it in the World Cup mode. So 100 millimeters in the front and 95 in the rear. So still very much a racer setup.
Yeah.
And, you know, like it's such a balancing act. And this was a huge balance was a big word for this attempt because, you know, like I said, you need to be robust. You don't want to have issues. You don't want to have mechanicals. Those are the slowest possible things you can have. But at the same time, there's 16,000 feet of climbing. So you don't want to put yourself at too much of a disadvantage by carrying unnecessary weight. And so it is a balance of you do want the lightest, fastest equipment, but then you want to be conservative with how you set up that equipment.
Yeah, interesting. Well, maybe this is a dumb question, but just looking at the video, the film that you made, which we'll have a link to that in the show notes. Great video. Everybody should watch it right after we talk. But in the video, and based on the parts of the Kokopelli that I've ridden, it's not super technical. Maybe there are some sections that are really technical. So my dumb question is, would a gravel bike make sense? Like, could you do it as fast or maybe faster on a gravel bike?
I don't know if you could even make it on a gravel bike, to be honest. I think you're right. There are some sections where I think people would look at it and think, you know, the first 2-hour climb, there's a 30-mile flat section in the middle. So that's about 50 miles, I would say, of the 137 that could work on a gravel bike. But then the other, whatever that is, 80, right? 87 miles are pretty robust. There's some solid rock rolls. It's very physical trail. A lot of, you know, small 6 to 12 inch ledges that you're lifting your front wheel up over and over or riding down over and over. So I think between the compliance factor, which as we know, especially as we see tires get wider and wider, is speed, but also the physical factor. Like you need your body to not be getting beat up so much across the course of that effort.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sure it's been done, and I'm sure you could do it on a gravel bike, but those descents, you'd go a lot slower, I'm sure, than on a mountain bike.
Yeah. And I think, you know, even across the people who have claimed these fastest known times, so looking at Pete Stetna, Kurt, Kate, Rebecca Rush, you know, they've all done it not only on mountain bikes, but on full suspension mountain bikes. And I think Pete even mentioned that he would have loved having even more suspension than his bike had. So I think it's just anyone who's ridden in that Moab area knows that it's very rough, very harsh terrain that really adds up across those hours. And you do finish the final 12 miles of the course, in the single track, are extremely technical. Those are very, very challenging. You know, even doing them fresh, I'm not quite sure if I could do that 12 miles without getting off the bike, because there are so many big challenges in there. And especially when you're that fatigued at the end, you know, cross-eyed, kind of shaking a little bit just from the fatigue, it gets pretty hairy in there.
Yeah. That's crazy. So yeah, you mentioned that, you know, a number of folks have attempted FKTs on the Kokopelli Trail. Caitlin Boyle and Kurt Refsnyder, you know, Lachlan Morton recently did one there. Why do you think there's so much interest in the Kokopelli Trail? What made you go for this FKT since so many other people have done it?
I fell in love with it. I think it's one of those trails that it offers so much. And across those 137 miles, there's so many different types of terrain. You know, you go from the valley of Moab up to high alpine riding. You have big burly descents back down into this, you know, sort of creek area. You have huge hike bikes with these big old boulders. You have, you know, these desert just plain sections that just feel so desolate that you can do a 360 and see absolutely nothing for miles and miles. You have single track areas that'll test even the best mountain bikers. You have, it's just, it changes so much across these miles that you never get tired of it. You never get tired of the scenery. There's going to be a section that is a challenge for your skill set and also fits your skill set perfectly. There's going to be, it's just so diverse that it feels like there's really something for everybody. And it's just a spectacular emotional journey too, as you watch, because you start in Moab and you climb up and over the La Salles, which is this massive mountain range. And then as you head towards Colorado, you continue to see the La Salles and you watch them get smaller and smaller and smaller as you ride away. And the perspective of that, of your perspective in this world, of you just being this tiny dot traversing such a vast landscape, I think it offers what a lot of us who love the outdoors and love mountain biking is after, which is just feeling like we are a guest in this landscape. The Kokopelli Trail, the Kokopelli owns that area. Like, that trail is their home. We're just a guest for the day.
Yeah. That's a cool perspective. I'm curious about, it's a 137-mile trail or route that you're doing. How do you pace yourself for a ride like this? Do you set a heart rate target that you want to keep the whole time, or is it speed or something else? How do you come up with that?
Yeah, so my coach and I worked out power ranges for the whole day. And it is a challenge because, so you've got the first 2-hour climb, a small descent, and then an hour-long climb. So you can pretty much call it 3-hour climb out of the gate. And you can set a very specific power target for that climb. So we did that. And then there's a 30-ish mile flat section in the second half, which again, you can really get on top of the pedals and you can set a power target for that. The stuff in between is quite undulating and very burly, where it's a couple hard pedal strokes to make it up this rock, and then, coast for 5 seconds and then push hard and so that becomes very challenging to set numbers. And that's where I think a lot of experience does come in. Of, you can't look at your power because, you can, but it's just fluctuating so much. Your heart rate is also fluctuating and pretty delayed because of those spikes. And so you're really relying on a feeling. And that's again where I'm so thankful for that first attempt, because the feeling that I would have felt like was satisfactory, of this is as hard as I can sustain, in these type of things you forecast. If I feel this way now, how will I feel in an hour? And with that type of forecasting, I would have been satisfied with the pace, but watching the wind, watching the time slip away and the elements, I knew if I wanted any chance, I had to put all of that aside and go for it. And because of that, I pushed myself not only in the elements, but physically with power numbers further than I ever would have before. And that gave me the confidence in attempt 2 to say, well, I did these numbers when I had to.
Right.
So that means I can do them anytime. And so I was able to set actually a little bit faster pace even in the second attempt.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. Yeah. A lot of mountain bikers, we don't use power. Obviously athletes do, but yeah, that makes a good case for like, maybe more of us should. Like, I don't know. I'm curious now to give it a try.
Yeah, it's for sure a very interesting. I think it's important, to start out, like I said, on that 3-hour climb with a pretty good understanding of where you want to be, because it is so straightforward. You're going to be climbing this for the next 3 hours. But after that, you really just have to settle into your own rhythm and your own, it's pretty cool out there. Like even though I had a film crew they didn't give me any support, including we didn't speak to each other at all. From the first moment I started till the end, we did not communicate. And even though they got incredibly spectacular shots, most of that is either one via a drone, where maybe I see the drone, but I see no people. And then there's a lot of places out there that they can't access me. Only a bike can go there. Not even their side-by-sides can get there. So there's a lot of times where I am completely alone in this vast wilderness, and all you hear is your own breathing. And it's really special.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about that because, I mean, you start off the film talking about the film crew and, you know, making it clear that like they're not there to support you. And part of that is because of this like unofficial rule about individual time trials that you can't receive any type of assistance. And I guess some people have interpreted that to mean you can't have a film crew. So do you think, like, obviously the film crew didn't help you, and by nature of just filming, that doesn't help a person. So do you think like these rules should be clarified? I mean, it's hard because it's not like this is a rule written down anywhere anyway, but yeah, what do you think is like a good way to, or a fair way to deal with that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, you know, and you're right. I do clarify in the film, mostly because I just want it to be very clear what I did and what I'm doing. And like I even say, I'm not here to argue that. And I am fine with that. However, people want to decide whether or not the film crew is, like you said, it counts or it doesn't count if the film crew there. That's everyone's own decision, and that's okay. But what I want to be clear is how I did do it.
Right.
Like I said, I want it to be very clear that the film crew did not help me. They did not speak to me. They watched me take a wrong turn and let me go. You know, they were very much not helping. Right. And that's how I want it. That's a good thing. I want to be responsible for myself out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's how it's supposed to be, as far as I understand it too. I mean, it's kind of a journalistic approach in terms of, I mean, maybe reality TV doesn't always like hew to that standard, but documentaries and things like that's generally the rule anyway. Well,
and it's funny because at the end of the day, all of this is an honor system approach, right? Because also if I don't have a film crew, the only thing I have is the file at the end. And how does someone know that I didn't have someone out there? You know, like in some ways the film crew offers a deeper insight to watching me do it. But like I said, at the end of the day, these things, they're remote, they're hard to monitor. And, you know, I think that anyone who does do these loves this type of, if you want to call it racing, that they're gonna do it in a way that's honorable and trustworthy. But for me, you know, if people want to argue the film crew, that's fine. I want to share it with the world. And again, not because look at this really cool thing I did, but because there's a lot of people out there who can't ride the Kokopelli. They'll never get to see that. And this is a way that I can share what I love with the world, with my family and friends. I can say, look at this incredibly beautiful landscape. We can allow other people to fall in love with this place when they've never even been there. We can tell a story that, you know, these things like Rose Garden Hill, the giant hike-a-bike in the middle, there is no way to describe that in words. It seems that someone can really appreciate what that's like. But when you see it visibly, it takes on life. And that is why I love having the film crew there to document it, because I think it brings people into the space, and also I hope brings people into the sport. You know, I think that even though we want to keep FKTs pure, you know, we want to keep these things truly adventurous and raw. I think it's also important to captivate people and to let them know why it's exciting that we're out there doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is there like a person or an organization that that keeps official FKTs? Or I feel like we're really just talking about like, what's the public consensus? Like we all agree, yes, that was the FKT and that other one wasn't. Like for Kokopelli's specifically though, is there a person or a group that is kind of like the last say on that?
That's really interesting. I think I'm still newer in this world, so I'd probably have to defer that question to somebody else who's more of an authority. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, it probably depends where you look, right? Like, is it the QOM on Strava? Is it bikepacking.com? Is it a different entity? I think you see it more with the longer ones for sure. Like there was such big debate over Lael's Arizona Trail and Lachlan's Tour Divide, right? Like those are the ones that we really see get scrutinized. But I know for me that I'm really thankful that they had the crew there because I've never done the Tour Divide and I can't quantify what that's like until I see Lachlan's footage of it.
Yeah, same. Right. I mean, all of us, I think, love watching that stuff. And so, yeah, it does seem silly to gatekeep and be like, no, you can't do that because it's against some rule that's not written anywhere. And yeah, as far as I know, for Kokopelli's, I don't think there's a central organization that keeps those records. And yeah, it depends, Tour Divide, that's like its own race, like where they, there is an organizer that's sort of in charge. And so they kind of get the last say. But then, yeah, I was looking at Lael's attempt, she's trying to ride around the world right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's like a Guinness Book of World Records record for that. And it's like Guinness is the authority on around the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But not right. But why not Tour Divide? I don't know. So I guess it really just depends on which one you are. I think, because I don't know that anybody even wants to get involved in that, like arbitrate these disputes about like, oh, well, he cheated or, he did this thing that it shouldn't count. And like, my goodness, I think just crowdsourcing it's probably the way it's going to work out forevermore, where we all just are kind of like, yeah, do most people agree that was the fastest? Yeah. So interesting.
Well, and I think the current FKT holders on the Kokopelli, current and past, I should say, have documented it. I've watched Kate's film and Kurt's film and Pete's film. And so it seems potentially more normalized for that route. But again, I'm sure there's someone who would debate that as well. So that's okay. I mean, I think again, because this sport is about the purity of the sport and the rawness of the sport, most of us also, that argument is just like, that's fine. I'm not here to stake some claim in history. I'm just here to push myself and see what I can do. And again, watching all of the videos, even back to, Rebecca Rush, I believe it was 2013, set the first fastest known time on the Kokopelli. That was her overarching theme as well. I'm out here to see how far I can go. And I think that's a really common thread between all of us who love attempting these type of efforts.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so in your video, and then also actually earlier in this conversation, you were saying how you had to embrace the idea that not everything is going to go perfectly. And you kind of earlier contrasted that to like racing, like World Cup racing, where everything does kind of have to go perfectly. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, I guess in both cases, like, does luck play a role in mountain bike racing, and like in terms of where you finish on the podium, or is it really come down to skill and fitness? Like, what's the mix between luck versus skill and fitness on any given competition?
Yeah, I think there can be an element of luck for sure, especially when it comes to potentially mechanicals and things like that. Like, there are things that you can do to mitigate those. Like, well, were you running the right choices? Did you have the right tire pressure? Did you check your bolts? These are things that of course we do, but there's also like the grass was hiding the rock and no one could see it. Or I was riding someone's wheel and all of a sudden they moved and I ran straight into the thing. Or someone crashed in front of me and I had to crash into them too. There is an element of luck with those type of things. Mm-hmm. For me with racing, an interesting thing is tactics, right? Is a lot of the time, since we're racing each other and the goal is to win, we aren't always racing the clock. So there are times in these races where we're not going, quote unquote, as fast as we can, because part of beating the competition is maybe easing up, maybe looking around, maybe planning, maybe easing up because you're about to go really, really hard, or maybe it's, I don't want them to be able to draft off me in the flat section, so I'm going to way overpace it on this first climb. There's a lot of tactical elements involved because you're racing other people, and that's what it takes to win. And I love that. I'm a racer at heart. I love that competition. That's my first love. But what I love about these FKTs as well is, since there is no one else, there are no tactics. And instead, I get to pursue this as truly the fastest that I can ride the trail. And that means there is no reason that every single pedal stroke I do shouldn't be the fastest that I can make that single pedal stroke. And that's why I think a lot of the times these FKTs are the purest form of the sport, because it's just you and the trail and the elements, and there is nothing and nobody in your way. And you can't blame your success or failure on anybody but yourself. And I think that is something really unique about these efforts that we don't see in racing.
Yeah. You make a really good case for, the FKT being really one of the most pure forms of mountain bike racing. While we're on the topic of race strategy, I have a question I've always wondered about racing mountain bikes at the professional level. Is it bad form to prevent somebody from passing you? Do you block people out? Because I've been hearing that at the local level or high school, especially, that's frowned upon. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering how do the pros see it?
Yeah, man, this is a tough question. And if you ask 10 different people, you might get 10 slightly different answers. Okay. I guess for the average person, I would say in high school racing and amateur racing, please let somebody pass. We're trying to encourage improvement. And if somebody's held up throughout a race, they don't get to see how much they've improved or how fast they can go. And that's a bummer. Mm-hmm. In professional racing, this is our job. And it's our job to try to win. Right. And there's money on the line. And for a lot of us, it's a livelihood that's on the line in these events. And so I think with that comes a more cutthroat mentality. And it should be, because we are, in theory, should be the highest level of the sport. And so in my personal opinion, you shouldn't be blocking somebody on the trail. Mm-hmm. If somebody, if it's a fire road and somebody comes by on my right and there's plenty of room to pass, I shouldn't be moving over to prevent them from passing. Right. That to me is poor form. And if you do that, you're going to get called out and you're going to be known for that in the group. Mm-hmm. If it's a single track trail and we're descending and somebody comes up on you and says, hey, I want to pass, at the professional level, I don't think it's your job to stop and let them go. Right. Because it's going to slow you down potentially. Yes, or maybe you're a faster climber and you're like, hey, I need to be in position because I know we got a climb coming up and I'm just going to pass you right back. Precisely. It is the person who is behind. It's their job to execute the pass. You shouldn't prevent them from passing, but you don't have to alter your forward motion in order to let it happen, if that makes sense. Gotcha. Yeah, right. That does make sense. Right. As long as it's not slowing you down, it's the nice thing to do. But hey, yeah, competition is competition, especially at your level.
Interesting.
And you see people make full strategies around that. So it's pretty well known that that is the unspoken thing as to what'll happen. Like at Sea Otter at the start of the year, you hear people, it's 3 minutes on the track and then it's 15 minutes in single track. And those 3 minutes on the track, it might as well be a 3-minute race. We are going full gas for that single track. And people talk about, I messed up in that start and it cost me the whole race.
Yeah. Because you can't get around people on the single track. That's the issue.
Yep, exactly. And so as a professional, that is part of the race strategy and that's part of what we're looking at when we pre-ride these courses is where are the places that I can pass and where are the places that I'm locked in and how can I make sure I'm in a good spot for those locations.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah.
So this is your second big FKT in the past few years. So what do you think? Like, do you enjoy it enough to attempt more?
Yes. Yeah. I think everyone listening to this probably can tell that. I love it. Like I said, it's a purity of sport thing for me. It's a chance to see how far I can go. And you know what else too, that I think is worth mentioning is as we compare and contrast racing versus these time trial things are these two different entities, is it, okay, Hannah's doing these two different things. And the answer is yes, and the but is, I think it helps me so much for my job as a racer as well. I think like I said, it shows me how far I can go and I can bring that over to the race course. It absolutely translates from one to the other. And this FKT on the Kokopelli trail, without a shadow of a doubt, made me a better racer as well. And so I think, and I think that's something, again, that people can relate to life is the way that we move through this world and move through life. A lot is about comparing and contrasting experiences. And that's how we often in our minds, subconsciously or not, decide if we can do something. Can I do this? Well, have I done something similar to it before? How hard is this going to be? Well, I did this other thing that was similar. And so as a racer, the more things that you've done, the more experiences you can pull from. And that's one of the reasons that whether it's FKTs, whether it's these crazy stage races, whether it's bizarre challenges, for me, it's really important to go out and to experience these crazy feats, because when it comes down to the start line, it all adds up to confidence for me, because I know I've done something harder or I've done something similar, and that allows me to have a lot of confidence.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, yeah. Is part of the strategy, like if I asked you which FKT are you targeting next, is part of the strategy to not say it out loud, because that's, you don't want a bunch of people going out there and trying to attempt it at the same time, or is it set more by the production, whereas, you're doing this film and it's going to come out and you don't want to like ruin the surprise? Is part of like not saying that you're going to do a FKT part of strategy?
I think it's all of the above. I think it's, you don't want to give away your fun ideas, right? Like with the whole enchilada, I was kind of standardizing that in a route. So it's like, I wanted to keep that a secret. With the Kokopelli, it was the longest thing I had personally ever done. So it felt like maybe it would be a shock to hear my name associated with that for people, so it's a little bit of everything. It's the surprise. It's wanting to not spoil it, not have other people out there, maybe taking it. It's everything. I think it's, I don't know. Yeah, I have another one planned. Competitive Cyclist and we're already talking about it. We're already starting to plan it. It's so funny. We had the premiere just 2 days ago, and as we wrapped up and we're cleaning up, it was like, oh, by the way, and I looked into this for the next one. It's like, oh, perfect. Okay. Already starting to work and plan together.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be a secret for a little while.
Cool. Well, what can you tell us that's next for you? What's the next race on your calendar for this summer and looking into the fall?
Yeah, the next race for me will be the Leadville 100, which is my favorite race. So I'm super excited to go back to Leadville to race that one again. And then, I've got a lot on the calendar: Leadville, Steamboat, Shawinigan. I'm doing the whole Lifetime Grand Prix. But probably another notable one is I'll be doing the Marathon Mountain Bike World Championship this year in September. So that's definitely a big goal of mine as well.
Awesome. And where's that one being held again?
That one's actually in Snowshoe, West Virginia. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Cool. Well, Hannah, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us. Truly an inspiring FKT and the film, and just everything that you're able to share. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Well, you can find a link to Hannah's Kokopelli Trail FKT film on the show notes, and we'll also have a link to her Instagram as well. That's all I've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.